Hello, this is Professor Brown-Sederberg, and I'd like to demonstrate the break and continue statements. Now, the break and continue statements are used within loops. Here I have a program aptly named DemoBreakAndContinue. And you see that this program consists of some very simple lines of code. I've declared an int named sum and given it an initial value of 0. I'm printing to the screen the string I, tabbing over, and then the string sum. I then have this for loop. Now what this for loop will do is it will print out the value of I and then the value of sum, tabbing over in between. Next line, next line, next line. It'll be 2 columns. So we see our for loop. Now our for loop is controlled by this int I that has an initial value of 0. As long as I is less than 10, I'll iterate through this loop. With each iteration of the loop, we'll increment I. Now the loop consists of these 2 lines of code. Find the value of sum, add to it the value of I, and overwrite the value of sum. So sum plus I is then written into the space sum. We'll then print out the value of I, tab over a space, and print out the value of sum, and come back up to the top of this loop. Now let's compile this and run it. And we see that we have this output. Indeed, I have I and then sum, the headers of my 2 columns. We've printed the values of I from 0 through 9, the values of sum from 0 to 45. Now, how did we find those values? Well, you know that our loop is constructed this way. We give I initial value of 0. We continue through the loop as long as I is less than 10. We increment I by 1 each time we iterate through the loop. And our loop consists of finding the value of sum, adding to it the value in I, and overwriting sum, and then printing to the screen I and sum. So here we have this print line, right here. See the results of it. Now we know that our initial value of I is 0, and our initial value of sum is 0. So with this line, we have sum 0 added to I 0, and saved into the space sum. Now remember, we only went into this loop because I was less than 10. Remember, I starts off as 0. So as we came to this line for int I equals 0, I less than 10 plus I, we gave I initial value of 0. That's done only once. We then tested I. Is I less than 10? Yes, it is. We're into the loop. And so this line of our loop takes the value of sum, which we know is 0, the value of I, we know that's 0. We add them together and we put them into the space sum. We print those values to the screen. So this sum is the result of 0 plus 0 being written into that space. We then come up to the top of our loop. We increment I. I now has a value of 1. Is I less than 10? Yes, it is. We've passed the test. We go into our loop. We take sum, 0, add 1 to it, that's the value of I, put it into sum. We then print out the value of I and the value of sum, and that's this one and this one. We come back up to the top of the loop. We increment I. I now has a value of 2. Is 2 less than 10? Yes, it is. We come into the loop. We add I, 2, to the value of sum, 1. We write it into sum. We print out I and sum. That's our 2 and our 3. We come up to the top of the loop, increment I. I now has a value of 3. Is I less than 10? Yes. So we add I, 3, to the value in sum, which is 3. We get our 6. And we go through this until I is no longer less than 10. So I has a value from 0 through 9. Our sum values 0 through 45. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce some code right here. And the code I'm introducing is this if statement. And you'll see that it asks, is it true that sum modded by 2 is equal to 0? If it is, we'll execute this line of code, and that's the continue statement. Now what a continue does is it will go to the top of the loop. It breaks out of that iteration of the loop. As we break out of this iteration of the loop, we will not execute this line. We'll go back up to the top. When you hit a continue statement, it goes right up to the top of the loop. Now, let's see what happens if we execute this code. Remember, we're testing, is it true that sum modded by 2 is equal to 0? That is, if sum is even. So if sum is even, we're going to go back up to the top of the loop. Now remember what we had before the introduction of this code. 0 through 9, 0 through 45. Let's compile this code and run it. And you see that now we have printed to the screen the same I and sum, the headers of our columns, but we are only printing 1 and 2 and 5 and 6 and 9, and sums of 1, 3, 15, 21, and 45. We're only printing to the screen the values of I and sum when the value of sum is not even. If sum is even, we're going back up to the top. We're not executing this line. Notice these are the odd values of sum. So on our first time through, with sum equal to 0 and I equal to 0, sum 0 plus I 0, saved into the space sum, is sum modded by 2 equal to 0? Yes, it is. We go back up to the top of the loop. We don't execute this line. So we don't have that first line that we saw last time of 0 and 0. We do increment I. I now has a value of 1. We'll test is I less than 10? Yes, it is. So sum 0 plus I 1 is put into the space 1. Is sum modded by 2 equal to 0? No, it's not. We do not execute this continue statement. We execute this println statement. And that's how we get 1 and 1. We then come back up to the top. Now I equals 2. I is less than 10. We come in here. We are adding 2 to 1, putting into the space sum. Is sum modded by 2 equals 0? No. So we execute this line. We have 2 and we have 3. We come back up to the top, and now I has a value of 3. We'll add 3 to sum here. Sum modded by 2 equals to 0? Yes, it is, because it's 6. We'll execute this continue statement, come back up to the top. So we did not execute this line where we had 3 and 6. Remember in the prior example we had 3 and 6 as the next line printed. Continue takes you out of the current iteration of the loop. Doesn't exit the loop, just takes you back up to the top. Now notice as we've executed the continue statement, we've come back up and incremented I and gone through the loop, kept going through. We're just executing that iteration of the loop. So any code that follows the continue statement is not executed on that iteration of the loop. That's a continue statement. Now, a continue statement keeps you in the loop. It just goes back up to the top. The break statement is different. The break statement has you execute the loop. So let's look at a break statement. Let's change this and have our test be if sum is greater than, let's say, 20. We will break. And so we will exit the loop. That's what a break statement does. So if the value of sum is greater than 20, we're going to exit this loop. Let's compile. And let's run. And let's see what we have printed to the screen. We have I from 0 through 5, sum from 0 to 15. Well, I know that I had 0 and 0 was my first time through, and then plus 1, and then plus 2, then plus 3, then plus 4, then plus 5. I would then be adding, my next number would be 6. Adding 6 to 15 would give me 21. I'm out of the loop. So we broke out of the loop, exited it completely, when sum was greater than 20, became greater than 20. And we know that we exited here with I having a value of 6, because when 6I was value added to sum 15, the result was 21. That would make sum greater than 20. So a break statement gets you out of the loop completely. Continue statement brings you back up to the top. They're both very useful for the control of loops, dealing with situations as you manipulate the logic of your code, as you write your code. These two statements, break and continue, can be very, very useful. Thank you.